Hi guys, I'm Valia. In this video we'll talk about static tables. I'll take you through how to write a high-level IELTS academic writing task 1 report based on a static table. So, what do I mean by a static table? Well, there are actually two kinds of tables. Static tables represent data at a single point in time. Like the table you can see on your left gives us some information about 1 year, namely 2002. There are also dynamic tables, those representing data over a period. Dynamic tables require a bit different approach. You will have to talk about growth, decline, maybe fluctuations. So it would be a bit too overwhelming, I think, for you to watch about both kinds in one video. Therefore, I've decided to just focus on static tables. All right, if you see writing task 1 for the first time, how do you feel about it? The knee-jerk reaction of my students, especially those who are allergic to maths, is what a horrible task. But I think it isn't really, because first, there is no mathematics involved. Well, you will probably have to do some simple calculations, but I promise they're going to be very simple. And second, all you need to know is A, how to structure your response, and B, what grammatical structures and sets of vocabulary you need to use for each type of chart. Whatever chart you're describing, whatever chart your report is going to be based on, you need to use the following structure. First, it's the introduction that paraphrases the task. Then you have the overview that gives the most important information. And then you have a couple of paragraphs about specific features. You can now see my sample answer that we'll be looking at with these 3 ingredients color-coded. Now let's move on to structures and vocabulary patterns necessary for describing static tables. Grammar-wise, you will need comparisons, comparative structures. For example, the figures for snowboarding were the lowest. Right here we have the superlative structure. Or mountain climbing was not as popular as rollerblading, as is another example of comparative structure. As for vocabulary, first you'll need vocabulary to refer to the number or amount. In our table, we can use the words such as proportion, percentage, or figures for. Notice we can't use the word number. We can't write the number of females. Why? Because the information is given in percentages. That is why I've given this example. The proportion of males participating in snowboarding was nearly double that of females. Next, you'll need the verbs. For static tables. So in the first category, we have the verbs such as account for, to comprise, to make up, and so on. Example, rollerblading accounted for just over a quarter of the participants. Next, you will need the vocabulary to compare sets of data. And here you may be interested in phrases such as exceeded or surpassed. All right, the example, when it comes to rollerblading, the proportion of females exceeded that of males by 10%. Notice how I've used the preposition by to talk about the difference. Now I will walk you through the process of actually writing a report based on this static table. So now you can maybe pause the video and study the table a bit more carefully. I never recommend starting writing the moment you see the task. First, spend a couple of minutes analyzing the table. And here are some things you may want to examine closely. First, it's the name of the table. Of course, we want to make sure we understand what the table shows. Next, what the columns and the rows show. In our case, the rows show extreme sports and the columns show give information about male, female participation and total participation. Notice that the information is given in percentages, not in numbers. That is important because that's going to influence the language that we will use in our report. Next, pay attention to the highest and the lowest values. If there are any patterns, if there are any exceptions to the patterns. This is the information, by the way, you might want to include in your overview, but I will talk about it a bit later. And then, based on the question above, think about how the information can be grouped. Here are the things that I have noticed. Well, first, it is obvious that rollerblading ranked first in terms of the total participation, followed by skateboarding and mountain biking, while snowboarding was the least popular, right? So first, I've decided to analyze the last column. Now, I want to talk about the first two columns. So mountain biking, mountain climbing, and skateboarding were clearly male dominated, right? So you can see the difference is quite large, right, between males and females when it comes to these sports. In mountain climbing, the figures for males and females were very close. Yeah, and the last feature I've noticed is that rollerblading was the only sport more popular with females, not with males. So I'm gonna include all these features when I write my report. Now, how I will group information. I would group it from the most to the least popular. So first I will write about rollerblading, then skateboarding, and then mountain biking. That would make up my first body paragraph. And then the second body paragraph is going to be about mountain climbing and snowboarding. Step 2, writing an introduction. The very first sentence you write is called the introduction. On this stage, your job is simply to paraphrase the task. Now, let's have a look at our task to see what we can change so that it becomes a good introductory sentence. When I say paraphrasing the task, I mean the first sentence in the task. You can see it's highlighted. So the table below is going to be the table. Please don't paraphrase the table. The table is the table. And please don't write below because the table will actually appear above your answer. So it's just going to be the table with the definite article. That's how we paraphrase the subject. Next, let's paraphrase the verb. The verb is gives information about. And again, there's nothing really you can invent here. I would just use the verb shows. Illustrates is also possible, but please don't fantasize, don't give some weird synonyms in this part, just stick to the conventional options. Next, I'm going to paraphrase the object, which is quite lengthy, participation of 11 to 14-year-olds by gender. Now, to paraphrase the objects, I'm gonna look at the table to see what the columns show. And what we see is percentages or proportions. And that is the word that I'm gonna use. Proportions of males and females 11 to 14-year-olds. I'm going to paraphrase it as aged 11 to 14. And then the rest of my object in a selection of extreme sports in the UK in 2003 becomes in a single year. All right, so this is how it technically works. You just simply take the first sentence of your task and paraphrase it. Paraphrase the subject, the verb, and the object. Don't forget about time expressions as well. However, I've decided here in this particular case to extend my introduction and added this part as well as the total percentage of participants for each sport. The reason for my doing so is because I want my introduction to reflect the content of the third column, right? And the third column gives us the total figures, right? So my introduction turned out to be quite lengthy, but I think it's okay. Step 3, writing the overview. The introduction is followed by the overview. This is a very important part where you summarize the key features of the chart. But what features are key? Well, first, they include any trends or patterns as well as exceptions to them. When I looked at the first two columns, I noticed a pattern. The figures for males were higher generally. In all extreme sports, there's just one exception, which is rollerblading. Okay, so look at all the trends and patterns. Second, we'll look at extremes, the highest and the lowest values. I've chosen to write about rollerblading as its figures were the highest in total. And I've chosen to write about snowboarding since it was the least popular sport overall. Remember, the overview should not contain any statistics. And this is what we got. Overall, males showed a great interest in all the given sports with the exception of rollerblading. In total, rollerblading ranked first, while snowboarding was the least popular extreme sport. So that's the overview. It takes up a separate paragraph. Step 4, write your 2 body paragraphs, preferably 2 body paragraphs, reporting the main features. As I've mentioned, I've decided to write about rollerblading, skateboarding, and mountain biking in 1 paragraph. Remember, it's important to include specific data to support your claims. So, this is what I have. In terms of total participation, the figures for rollerblading, skateboarding, and mountain biking were the highest. Notice that I start with like a topic sentence, which gives us the idea of what the rest of the paragraph is going to be about. Rollerblading accounted for just over a quarter of the total, being the only sport where the proportion of females exceeded that of males by 10%. I think you can go through the rest yourself. And in the second paragraph, I've decided to include the information about mountain climbing and snowboarding. So you can read the rest yourself. Notice how I've used the word the former in the second sentence of my second body paragraph to avoid the repetition of the word mountain climbing. Of course, you should never forget to check your work. Make sure that it has more than 150 words, that your introduction paraphrases, not copies the task, that you have a very clear overview, starting with the word overall that summarizes all the key features of the chart. Then main features should be highlighted and supported with data. Your report should have logical structure and clear progression. Check it for any kinds of grammar mistakes. Make sure that all your words go well together. And this one is important. Stick to academic style. You should have no informal or colloquial expressions. Check for spelling, punctuation mistakes, and last but not least, do not include any opinions. This is not an opinion piece, you just have to summarize the information from the chart. That's it. I hope that was useful. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.